In the summer of 1720, the hottest stock on earth belonged to a company that barely traded anything at all. In a few months, its shares rose nearly 8 times over. Dukes, duchesses, shopkeepers, and servants poured their fortunes into it. Even Isaac Newton bought in. And the strange, dirty secret at the heart of it was this: the company's actual business barely existed. Its real product was the share itself, pumped higher and higher on rumor, easy credit, and the largest bribe ever paid to a government. This is the story of the South Sea Bubble, the first great stock market crash in history. A swindle so vast it bribed a king's court, ruined a nation, and gave us the very word we still use for a market gone mad. The history of money is the history of crime. Welcome to the vault. The South Sea Company was born in 1711, and from the very beginning, it was not really what it claimed to be. On paper, it was a trading company, granted the exclusive right to trade with the Spanish colonies of South America. To investors, that conjured visions of galleons heavy with Peruvian silver and Mexican gold. There was just one problem: Britain did not control South America, Spain did. Spain had no intention of letting a British company plunder its empire. In practice, the company got one ship a year and a grim contract to ship enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. The fabulous trade in gold and silver was almost entirely imaginary. So if the trade was a fantasy, what was the company actually for? The British government was drowning in debt from decades of war, and the company's true business was financial. It would take over chunks of that national debt. Creditors swapped the bonds they held for shares, and the company collected the interest from the state. It was, in essence, a machine for turning government debt into company stock, and in 1720, its directors had a breathtaking idea. Early in 1720, the South Sea Company made the government an astonishing offer. It proposed to take over almost the entire national debt of Britain. Tens of millions of pounds, the largest financial operation the country had ever seen. The mastermind was a director named John Blunt, and his plan was a thing of dark genius. The company would convert the government's debt into its own shares, but the higher the price climbed, the fewer shares it needed to hand over for each pound of debt. Which meant every share left over could be sold to the public for pure profit. So the whole scheme depended on one thing: the share price had to soar. And the directors set out to make it soar by any means necessary. First, they sold the dream. They spread glittering rumors of new treaties with Spain, of ports thrown open, of riches about to pour into the company's vaults. None of it was real. But the rumors did their work, and the price began to climb. Second, they invented easy money. The company let people buy shares on credit, putting down only a fraction. It even lent buyers the money to purchase its own stock. Demand exploded, debt piled on debt. Third, and this is the part that makes it a crime, they bought the government itself. The directors handed out large blocks of stock to the most powerful people in the kingdom. Not real shares, but fictitious holdings that could be cashed in for pure profit. Members of Parliament, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, John Aislabie, ministers, courtiers. Even through intermediaries, the king's own mistresses. It was a colossal bribe, dressed up as an investment. The very men who were supposed to police the scheme were quietly made rich by it. So of course, they approved it, and the law that should have stopped the madness instead waved it through. And then the country went insane. Through the spring and summer of 1720, South Sea stock rocketed, from around £130 toward 300, 500, and on toward 1,000. Fortunes were made on paper overnight. Servants quit their jobs. Lords mortgaged their estates. The whole of London crowded into the narrow lane called Exchange Alley to buy. And the fever spread far beyond the South Sea Company. Dozens of new bubble companies sprang up, each promising fantastical riches. One to drain bogs, one to build ships against pirates, one for a wheel of perpetual motion. And the most famous of all is real. A promoter advertised a company for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. Investors handed over money for a business he flatly refused to describe. He took in £2,000 in a single morning and was never seen again. A company so secret it was a crime to ask what it did. That is how completely the madness had taken hold. But a price built on rumor and borrowed money has nothing underneath it, and in the autumn of 1720, the ground gave way. It began quietly. The directors and the insiders, the ones who knew the trade was hollow, began to sell, cashing out at the top. As the big holders sold, the price wavered, and once it began to fall, the same machinery that drove it up now drove it down. Because so many had bought on credit, the falling price triggered a scramble to sell before their loans came due. Selling fed selling. From a peak near £1,000, South Sea stock collapsed, down through 500, 300, toward 120 by the end of the year. The human wreckage was staggering. Banks and goldsmiths failed. Aristocratic families were ruined. Ordinary people who had mortgaged everything were left with worthless paper and crushing debts. Suicides followed the crash through the winter. And among the ruined was Isaac Newton. He had bought in early, sold for a tidy profit, then, watching it climb, bought back in near the very top. When it collapsed, he lost a fortune, perhaps £20,000. He could calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies, he said, but not the madness of people. And here is the part that tells you exactly what kind of crime this really was. When the dust settled, Parliament launched a furious investigation, and what it found was rot all the way to the top. Bribery of ministers, falsified books, fictitious stock handed to the powerful. The company's own cashier, Robert Knight, fled the country with the secret ledgers, the ones that named which politicians had been bought, and those records conveniently vanished abroad. A few were punished. The Chancellor, John Aislabie, was found guilty of corruption, expelled from Parliament, and locked in the Tower of London. Some directors had their estates seized to repay a fraction of the losses, but the deepest players were shielded. A rising minister named Robert Walpole stepped in to protect the court and the ministry. They called him the Screen. He buried the worst of it, restored calm, and rode the wreckage to become the most powerful man in Britain, its first true prime minister. And the hollow company at the center of it all, it was never shut down. It limped on for another century, never really trading the South Seas it was named for. The lesson of the South Sea bubble is the one the market relearns in every generation. When a price only ever goes up, ask what is underneath it. And if the people selling you the dream have also quietly bought the men who are supposed to stop them, the crash is not a risk, it is the plan. The South Sea men sold shares in a trade that didn't exist. The next man in the vault didn't sell a company. He sold a metal and tried to corner so much of it he could squeeze the world. That story is already waiting for you here in the vault. The history of money is the history of crime. Welcome to the vault.